Hey, I'm firearms attorney Gilbert Ambler, and today I want to talk about summer travel with a firearm. This is a topic that lots of channels have touched on, and we've even touched on previously on this channel, but it's worth remembering because we're coming into summer vacation time, and I want folks to understand their rights and responsibilities and things to worry about when traveling with a firearm. If you have a concealed handgun permit, a license to carry a firearm, or whatever your state is going to call it, and you're traveling outside of your state, the first and biggest thing we need to worry about is reciprocity. Here in Virginia, if you have a Virginia concealed handgun permit, I tell people, generally speaking, heading south and heading west, you are in good shape, but heading north and heading east, like towards DC or towards Maryland and Pennsylvania and New York and New Jersey, we start to very rapidly run into states that are going to pose a problem. They're not going to recognize a Virginia concealed handgun permit. So what options do we have? One option we have is to consider whether we can obtain a license in those other states that would allow us to possess a firearm there. A second option to consider is, if we're not staying in those states, simply traveling through under the Safe Passage Act. Safe Passage Act is found at 18 U.S.C. 926A. It says that if you are going from one place where you can legally possess a firearm to another place where you can legally possess a firearm, you can go through a state that doesn't recognize your rights, provided the firearm is completely unloaded, and we recommend not only unloading the chamber, but also unloading the magazines, locked separately from the passenger compartment of the vehicle, with the ammo secured separately from the firearm. And then this is the most critical part of the law. It says that you can't be stopping in the state that doesn't recognize your rights. You have to be traveling through the state. What does through the state mean? Well, it certainly means no overnight stays. Our recommendation is, as much as possible, fill up on one side, drive through to the other side. In fact, there was a case out of New Jersey called the Revell case. And in the Revell case, this was a Third Circuit case. In the Revell case, a gentleman got jammed up in New Jersey after his flights got redirected. And ultimately what happened, his flights got redirected. He'd been planning on simply traveling through the state. Instead, he wound up having to stay overnight in New Jersey. He got a hotel voucher. The airport set him up with a hotel. He went to the hotel. He came, checked back in the next morning, and they arrested him when he checked back in. And they arrested him when he checked back in because they said, you stayed overnight with a firearm. So, and the conviction was upheld in that case. So what's the answer here? Do not stop if you were traveling through the state. In the event that something unfortunate like a plane mishap happens and you get stranded, apparently what he should have done was not take possession of the firearm, instead turned it over to TSA and hoped that he didn't get jammed up, or hoped that TSA didn't lose it overnight. So again, that's 18 U.S.C. 926A. That helps you if you're traveling through a state and you are not stopping. If you are heading to an unfriendly state, you could consider what other weapons you might be able to take that don't constitute firearms. For example, pepper spray. Now be aware, some of those states that don't recognize firearms may have restrictions on the type and amount of pepper spray that you can have. You need to do some due diligence before you travel, even with an alternative weapon like pepper spray, into a state that is not friendly to your right to defend it yourself. Finally, if you're heading somewhere south or heading somewhere west, and again, don't go too far west. When you start getting to Illinois or even across the country to California, there are still some unfriendly states out there. That is a big generalization. But assuming you're heading south, heading west to a friendly state where you're able to take your firearm and they recognize your right to have your firearm, you still need to know and abide by the state and local restrictions. Do you have an obligation to inform law enforcement when you're pulled over? That's one that you should be aware of before you take a firearm into a state that recognizes your right. Number two, are there any restrictions on where you can or cannot possess the firearm, such as state-owned roadside rest stops? That's a restriction that we have here in Virginia. Is that a restriction that's going to affect you elsewhere? Are there other states that have that restriction? Are there magazine capacity or ammo capacity, ammo type restrictions? Is it a state where you can conceal but not open carry, a state like Florida? So you need to do some due diligence on those subjects as well. Finally, if you're traveling from a constitutional carry state, I think you need to be very, very cautious because while you might have constitutional carry in your state, that doesn't necessarily mean that any other states are going to recognize that right. The exception here would be if you're going from one constitutional carry state directly to another constitutional carry state. A final very quick note, there is a federal law out there called the Gun-Free School Zones Act. The Gun-Free School Zones Act says that you can't be within 1,000 feet, including on public roadways, within 1,000 feet of a kindergarten through 12th grade school, public, private, or religious. The Gun-Free School Zones Act also has an exception that says if you have a license or permit to carry that is issued by the same state that the school is in, that provides you a federal exception to the Gun-Free School Zones Act, meaning you could drive by on public roads. Again, a lot of states are going to have restrictions on being on school property, but you're not in trouble simply for being within 1,000 feet of school property under federal law if you have a license or permit to carry issued by the same state that the school is in. So we're driving past a Virginia school, we have a Virginia concealed handgun permit, we're on public roads, we're in good shape under federal law and Virginia law for that matter. Where you need to be concerned here, technically speaking, is that if I carry into North Carolina with my Virginia concealed handgun permit, every time I get within 1,000 feet of a public school, I need to pull over, unload, lock it up, drive through the school zone, then I can pull back over, reload, and go back to carrying like normal. A very, very burdensome restriction, nonetheless, one to be aware of. If you enjoyed this content, go ahead, hit that subscribe button. Until next time.